We're embarking on a kind of series of talks about when reality speaks to us, or what reality says to us, meeting the Tantric Guru, and the Tantric Guru being reality. So each week we're looking at a kind of different message from reality, a different message that reality gives to us when we encounter reality. And this evening I'm going to be looking at reality speaking to us in the form of death, the death of ourselves or someone close to us. What that kind of message, message of reality speaks to us. So, and you could say what I'm going to be looking at is the precariousness of life and the preciousness of life, and then what we choose to do with it. That's what I'll be exploring this evening, really, the preciousness of life and precariousness of life, then what we choose to do with our life in the face of that. Quite recently, kind of still fresh in my mind, is the Bodhinaga Day festival, and it was a very poignant ritual, and part of that, very strong part of that, Vidanya read out a list of all the names of people with connections to members of our Sangha who had passed away in the last year, people who'd kind of passed away in the last year. And what struck me was two things. One was just the number of people, it seemed to go on and on and on, just the kind of large number of people who we collectively know who had passed away in the last year. And then out of that, the kind of message, I suppose the message from reality that came from that was just how normal death is actually. It's a very normal experience, it's a normal part of human life, normal in the sense that it happens so often to everybody. It's just very, very normal. It doesn't feel very normal when we experience it, when it happens to, when we have a brush with death, it happens to someone close to us, or it's our own death that we're contemplating. It doesn't feel normal then, but actually what came across from that ritual was from the huge number of people in the Sangha this year who've had somebody who they know who's died, just how normal an experience that is. And then the other thing that struck me from the Bodhinaga Day festival was the Buddha, because the whole festival is about the passing of the Buddha, the end of the physical existence of the Buddha, and how the Buddha faced that, how the Buddha faced his own death. Well, we use the word death because it's quite mysterious what happens when a Buddha dies, but I'm going to use the term death. So how the Buddha faced his own experience of death. And what an example that is, really. What an example to take as a Buddhist. When my own death comes, I hope I can learn something from that. So when the Buddha found out he was going to die, his response seems to have been two things that he was concerned with. One was other people. Throughout the whole of his kind of final weeks and months, he was just continuously concerned with other people. And also with the Dharma and the Sangha, the kind of future of the Sangha, and the kind of clarity and the survival of the Dharma. They seem to be the two things that the Buddha was most concerned about in the final weeks and months of his life. So there's a whole series of episodes in the Parinibbana Sutta, the sutta that tells a story of the Buddha's final weeks and months, where the Buddha just is repeatedly concerned for other people. So to begin with, he's concerned with Mara. We heard about Mara last week, and that Mara represents the Buddhist devil, Vidanya described it as, but kind of a personification of the things that are acting against us. But to begin with, the Buddha's even concerned for Mara. He says to Mara, he addresses Mara, well, don't worry, because Mara wants the Buddha to die, and he's complaining, when are you going to die? And you keep promising that you're going to die, when are you going to die? And the Buddha says to Mara, well, don't worry, evil one, I'm going to die soon. He's just reassuring Mara, putting Mara at ease that, I'm going to die soon. So he begins with reassuring Mara even. And then the person the final cause of his death is food poisoning. And he's very concerned to reassure the person who cooked the meal not to feel bad, not to feel shamed, because it's very, very auspicious to have prepared the meal. That is the Buddha's kind of final meal before starting to die. So he wants to really reassure Kunda, the chef, the man who made the meal for him. And then he wants to reassure Ananda, because Ananda is weeping and wailing, and he wants to, first of all, reminds Ananda of the teaching of death and impermanence, but also Ananda feels like he hasn't done it, he hasn't reached the goal, and the Buddha's about to die, his teacher's about to die. And the Buddha just reassures Ananda and says, well, you've practiced generosity and selflessness for years and years and years, and you're very, very close. You're very, very close to awakening. And he's very concerned. He rejoices in the merits of Ananda, and takes delight in Ananda. And these are in the Buddha's final hours, the final few at the final day of the Buddha's life. And what he's concerned about is rejoicing in his good friend and his companion, so that he feels reassured and confident going, as the Buddha passes away. And then throughout the last year as well, he's concerned with the Sangha, the future of the Sangha. So he repeatedly visits different Sanghas, different collections of his disciples, and just tells them again and again what to concentrate on, what to focus on, really gives them a clear message. Focus on ethics, focus on meditation, focus on wisdom and liberation. These are the four things to focus on, the threefold path that leads to liberation. So again and again he tells people, and he's really concerned about the clarity of the Dharma, the clarity of the teaching. And then again in his final few hours, he's concerned that his disciples understand and haven't got any questions for him. So he asks, he's in a considerable amount of pain, physical pain. And the sutta describes how the Buddha just bears this pain and is just concerned with other people. So he asks his disciples, has anybody got any questions? And 3 times he asks, and each time nobody has any questions. He's even concerned that somebody wants to be ordained, somebody wants to become a new disciple of the Buddha, and his disciples say, look, the Buddha's about to die, just leave him alone. And the Buddha overhears and says, no, let me speak to this man. And he ends up teaching this man and then making him his final disciple that he personally ordains. He's even concerned with the devas, the gods and devas that they can't see. They've come from all different realms to see the Buddha passing away. And there's a great big disciple blocking their view, so he asks this disciple to move so that all the devas can see. And he's also finally concerned with the villagers in the local villages, that they can come and personally see the Buddha, meet him before he dies. So his whole kind of approach over the last few weeks and months is all about other people, and all about the Dharma, all about the Dharma and the Sangha. So for me, a very, very inspiring example of how to face your own death, how to face your own death. And very, very briefly, I just wanted to also mention an order member who died a couple of years ago now, and he was called Pramodana, and he was based in Blackburn. And just again, how inspired I was by how Pramodana faced his own death. And I listened to a talk this morning which is available on Video Sangha and I think on YouTube as well. And he gave this talk just a few months before he died at an order convention. He didn't then know, he knew he had terminal cancer, but he didn't know how long he was going to live for. And he gave a talk just about his experience of discovering that he had terminal cancer and kind of what was important to him. And what was I going to say? Basically, he took real care to prepare to die well. What he wanted was to die well. He wanted to kind of not leave mess for people behind him. So he went on a kind of series of kind of giving away his books, making sure he didn't have books and possessions and things for people to sort out. And he also wanted to have people, the order, visit him. So he made his kind of house open and said he wanted order members to come and visit him as he was in his final weeks and months. And he wanted people also to send him messages of rejoicing. He wanted to be reminded of what he'd done with his life, what he'd spent his life doing, and kind of not have a kind of negative picture of himself as he was facing death. But there's a real kind of courage and bravery and a kind of straightforwardness around how he just accepted he was going to die and prepared for it, and a real example about how to die well, I thought. I might talk a bit more about Pramodana later. There's a few other things I want to say about how he faced his death, but I think I'll come on to talk about those later. So we're looking in this series like when reality speaks to us, when we have an encounter with reality. And one of the encounters we might not want to have with reality is a brush with death. And it could be, an example of the Buddha or the Pramodana, where we discover where we're going to die imminently. It's kind of an experience of our own imminent death. Or it could be a brush with reality, with death of a loved one or somebody close to us. But we can have that experience of a brush with death. And usually what happens for a lot of people is they can describe really getting clear, having a really clear perspective on what's important, really becoming clear to people what they value, what is important in that kind of immediate kind of time of having that brush with death. It's as though it really puts life in perspective, really puts values in perspective. We heard Daniel talking about this at Sangha Night a few weeks ago. Daniel gave a short talk about, in a way, a near-death experience, a kind of very serious crash on the motorway where he, thankfully came to no harm, but then just in the aftermath of that, realising what he really valued and that his life, what was important to him was kind of these deep values, the things that he wanted to live by. And there was, I don't know, in a way maybe I am very fortunate. I've not had very many encounters with death. Either, I'm very fortunate, my own health has been good, and kind of my friends and family have had good health. But what came to mind of somebody who had an encounter with death was a celebrity, a guy called Wilko Johnson. I don't know if people have heard of him, but he was a rock guitarist. And he still is a rock guitarist. But he was diagnosed with terminal cancer in 2012, and basically wasn't given long to live at all, a few months to live. And he was given the option of some chemotherapy, but told it would prolong his life by maybe a couple of months. And he decided he didn't want to have the chemotherapy. He basically decided that he was going to just make the most of the time he had left. And what he said, he described, was that he just had to accept, yes, I'm going to die. And he said that was quite an experience because it gave him a whole different perspective on his life. And there was lots of interviews. He gave lots of interviews shortly after it became public knowledge that he had terminal cancer. And one of the things that he said was that there was a kind of strange euphoria he experienced when he was diagnosed with terminal cancer, which that might sound like an odd thing, but he said that he walked out of the hospital and felt an elation of spirit. He said that he felt vividly alive, and that he was just looking at everything, the trees, the sky, the breeze, feeling the breeze, and just feeling vividly alive, very, very vividly alive. And what he decided to do was go on a farewell tour, basically to kind of make the most of the months he had left, and go on a farewell tour. And I didn't realise this, but I was looking this up today, and one of the first venues he played in was the Greystones pub in Sheffield, which is a great pub for watching live music. But yes, I didn't realise he started his farewell tour off in Sheffield. And and in an interview, one of the things he said was, well, the things that used to bring me down, or worry me, or annoy me, they don't matter anymore. And that's when you sit thinking, wow, why didn't I work this out before? Why didn't I work it out before? That it's just the moment that you're in that matters. Worrying about the future or regretting the past is just a foolish waste of time. And of course, we can't all be threatened with imminent death, but it probably takes that to knock a bit of sense into us. And so he gave a series of interviews where he just really had a vivid sense of the preciousness of life, of what the value of human life, what it means to be alive. I think a lot of people were impressed and surprised by his example of that. And it's a happy ending for Wilko Johnson. It's that's worth throwing a bit of happy ending into this talk. And he didn't die. He hasn't died. He basically kept on performing. He recorded an album. He kept on. He continued to be alive. He didn't have any treatment. He just carried on being alive. And he had this huge tumour. He describes having had this huge tumour, and it didn't. He was waiting for the onset of the symptoms, and they never came. And in the end, the doctor said, "Well, this is unusual. That you're not dying. Perhaps we can operate on this." And they successfully removed this massive tumour in different organs. But basically, he's been cured. He's now cured of what he was told was terminal cancer. And it's interesting. He's now trying to come to terms with the fact that he's not going to die. And he said that he had been previously a man who experienced a lot of depression, and suddenly he'd been lifted out of this and saw life very, very clearly. And now he's trying to get his head around the fact that he wasn't going to die. And it still sounds like it's quite a difficult experience for him to digest, really. But so what I take from that actually is, well, in a sense we are going to die, and we don't know when it's going to happen. And if we really realise that, really remember that, really have a sense of that, well, we can be in that sense, we can be in that state that Wilko Johnson was in, all of the time. If we're really in touch with the precariousness of life, and the fact that we don't know, we can't predict, each of us, how long our life will be. If we can stay in touch with that, then it will give us that, we can have that vividness, that appreciation, the clarity of the perspective that Wilko Johnson was experiencing. So, as Buddhists, it's something that we are encouraged to do, is to reflect on death in general, reflect on impermanence, and reflect on our own death. As Buddhists, this is a traditional practice that we are encouraged to do. It's not a very popular practice, I imagine. It's not something I tend to do a lot of, but the benefits are very, they're very, very important benefits. To be able to fully appreciate life and fully live life, we need to really appreciate and accept death, that we will die and we don't know when. I'm going to confess my own uncomfortableness with death and suffering and illness. It's not something, as I imagine it's probably quite common, quite a common experience, but I don't like to dwell on death or think about death or think about my own mortality. And what I've noticed what I was uncomfortable about is recently a couple of a friend a friend of mine or two friends of mine, and also Pramodana. There was the three people I met who have had quite serious illnesses or cancer. And what I noticed was I didn't go and visit them. I didn't want to go and visit them. There's the opportunity to go and say farewell to Pramodana, to go and kind of have a bit of he had this kind of open house where people go and visit him. And I just didn't want to do it. I did want to do it, but I didn't do it. I kind of couldn't bring myself to go and face somebody who was going to die, and I regret. That's a regret I have. That's a regret I have. I did send Pramodana an email. I sent him an email just to rejoice in some of the merits that I appreciated about him. I'd only met him a few times, but I really appreciated how he'd made me feel at home and at ease when I'd met him at order events. I was quite a new order member and kind of felt very nervous and not at home, and he put me at ease and reassured me. So I wanted just to kind of thank him for that and rejoice in his merits. And then I kind of included a kind of bit of a joke at the end. Well, it was kind of half joking, half seriousness, where I said that Lucy, my wife, was pregnant. We were expecting a child, and that I invited him to, if he wanted to, he could come and live with us in his next life. I don't know if he believed in rebirth or not, but if he did, this was our address, and look us up. And I suppose he took it in the kind of a good spirit, and he replied and thanked me for the invitation to be a Yorkshireman, because he's a kind of staunch Lancashire man, and he said he would consider it. Knowing Pramodana, he will have considered it, so we've now got a son who we've called Robert, and we'll have to wait and see when he starts to talk, if he has some of the characteristics of Pramodana or not. It'll be interesting to see. I've had a couple of other friends who've had cancer or serious illness, and I've got to see this reluctance to spend time with them, to visit them, and it's something I noticed and wanted to change, because I think it reflects my own uncomfortableness with my own suffering or death, not wanting to face that, not wanting to face it in other people. So I think there's something about, if we can be at ease and accept our own mortality and our own suffering, well, then we can be with other people's suffering, and we can kind of be with them in their experience of that. So as Buddhists, we are encouraged to remind ourselves of our own mortality, and based on that, we can make choices. We can decide to live well. We can really make the most of our life and live well. But what should we do? What should we do with our life? There's lots of, if life is very precious, we don't know when we're going to die. It could end, any time. What should we do in the face of that? What should we do with our life? And there's lots of choices we could try and make as much money as we can before we die. We could try and reach the pinnacle of the career ladder before we die. That would be some other options, things that people do try to do and pursue. There's lots of options, and there's this popular expression of bucket list, things to do before you die. So there are things like climb Mount Kilimanjaro, do a bungee jump, do a skydive, things to do before we die. And again, there's nothing wrong with any of these. Well, not any of these pursuits, but they're not the Buddhist answer. It's not what the Buddha said we should do before we die was do a bungee jump or skydive. It's not the Buddhist response of what to do with your life. So it'd be interesting to look actually, what did the Buddha do? What did Siddhartha do? So before the Buddha became the Buddha, he said he lived as a prince called Prince Siddhartha in northern India, and he lived, said, in a very luxurious life, like something like he lived in a palace or had a number of palaces. And most of you might be familiar with the story, but some of you might not be. And it's said that the Buddha was kept very sheltered, and he had a very secluded life. His parents kept him, particularly his father, wanted him to succeed him as become the next king. So he had a very secluded life. But it's said that Siddhartha became disillusioned. It's maybe it's equivalent of us, doing the skydiving, the bungee jump, or getting the lots of money, but realising that that's probably not what life is about, because it hasn't satisfied us. It hasn't fulfilled our kind of deepest needs. So the life must be about something else. So Siddhartha had this sense of longing, of kind of lack, boredom with his life, dissatisfaction. And what he did was defied his parents. He snuck out, it said, into the local Indian villages just to see what life was like for those people. And it said what he encountered shocked him. And what he did encounter was quite serious suffering, which is very common in India. And he saw somebody really struggling with sickness. He saw somebody struggling with old age, and he saw somebody who was dead. Apparently, he'd never seen a dead. Well, he'd never come across. He didn't know. It said he didn't know the concept of death. He'd never kind of encountered death before, but he saw death for the first time. He saw, I suppose, maybe this is a metaphor for how in the West we are very, very secluded from death. When two of my grandparents died, I didn't see them. I didn't see them for kind of months before they died, because my parents wanted to protect me from the fact that they were dying in a way that I kind of saw them when they were healthy, and then just didn't see them for quite a long time, and then went to their funeral where again I didn't see them. They were presumably inside the coffin, but I didn't know because I couldn't see them. And in India, people are cremated without coffins, generally. And if somebody dies, you will see their body, you'll see them, you'll encounter death much more vividly, much more closely. So there's different ways of interpreting the experience of Siddhartha. Some people literally say he'd never encountered suffering or death before. But you could also look at it, sometimes we really encounter something and we really take on board the meaning, the significance of it. It's like we really fully appreciate what it means to die, or what it means to suffer, what it means to have old age or illness. So I think that's probably, it might be the way I might interpret that story. Well, really, Siddhartha for the first time really understood, really got it, really deeply understood his own mortality and the mortality of the people around him. And it's a similar kind of situation to what I'm describing here. Kind of, well, what do you do in the face of that? What do you choose to do in the face of that? And the story also says, well, Siddhartha saw a fourth sight on that occasion. He saw a fourth person, and that person, combined with the experience of the vividness of death and suffering, really changed Siddhartha's life and prompted the whole start of the whole of the Buddhist tradition. And what he encountered was somebody living the holy life, somebody living the spiritual life, and he'd never seen that before either. And what became apparent to him was, well, there is something that I can do with my life. There is something that makes life meaningful and important. There is something worthwhile that I can do with my life. So he had both of those things, both of these ingredients. He had a sense of the precariousness and the kind of imminence of death, the kind of precariousness of life. He really understood death. But then he also had a sense of possibility, a sense of opportunity, and particularly, especially a sense of the value of the spiritual life. And based on those two experiences, Siddhartha made a radical decision. He decided to leave and abandon his luxurious life, his life as a prince, and to pursue a spiritual life, and to try and discover what, in a sense, what the deepest meanings of life are about, what is life really about. So that's what he did. Siddhartha left his previous life, embarked on a quest to discover the truth. And that was basically the start, that's the start of the whole Buddhist tradition that came out of that experience. So what can we learn from that? Well, basically there's two things are important that we reflect on, as Buddhists reflect on the kind of precariousness, the tenuousness of life, reflect on death. And also we reflect on what can be achieved with life as Buddhists. What is life as Buddhists? What is life about? And there are traditional lists that we can reflect on. And so I want to look at two of those lists in the sense of say, well, how can we get those same ingredients that Siddhartha experienced? How can we effectively reflect on death and reflect on what life is about, what we can do, what we can choose to do with life? Yeah, so there is a traditional list, and I think it originates from the Tibetan tradition. But it's a list called the Four Reminders, which I find a very powerful reminder, a very powerful reflection to do. And it used to, I don't know if this is still the case, it used to be done each morning at the morning meditation at the Buddhist Centre, that we would chant the Four Reminders before meditating each morning. And what I found was actually they would crop up, as the case with a lot of Buddhist reflection. If you really reflect on a teaching, then when you need it, it will crop up, it will kind of be there, it'll be present in your mind. And it was the case with these four reminders. And the first one is that life has inevitable difficulties. Nobody can control it all. They might not be in the right order, but I'm pretty sure that's the first one. Life has inevitable difficulties. No one can control it all. And this was a really effective reminder for me, that I'm not the centre of the universe. I can't control life. And when things go wrong, just to let go, just to accept it, that it's inevitable, things will go wrong, I can't control life, there will inevitably be difficulties. And then the second one was around, death is certain. I can't remember the first bit. The human body is fragile, the human body is impermanent, death is certain. So the second reflection is around the certainty of death. It's unavoidable. Human life is impermanent, death is certain. It's quite a simple phrase to say, but if you say it regularly and repeatedly, it really does hit home. This death is certain. And then third reflection, third reminder is that the karma I create shapes the course of my life. The karma I create shapes the course of my life. And then the fourth reminder is this human birth is precious, an opportunity to awaken. This human birth is precious, an opportunity to awaken. So I want to kind of talk a bit more to expand on this and kind of what this means and how to, what the implications are. So as Wilco Johnson was saying, just being aware of the certainty of death can bring a vividness to life. Having a brush with death, an encounter with death, or an imminence of death, it can bring a vividness to life. It can make life, seem very, very vivid and precious. But there's a particular slant for Buddhists about why life is precious, and it comes from these last two reminders, karma and preciousness of human birth. So what's being referred to in the third reflection when it talks about how the karma I create shapes the course of my life? What it's referring to is that our experiences are created by our mind. This is a really important Buddhist teaching. And that our states of mind are created by our actions. So this is what really the law of karma is saying, is that our actions, our choices, the choices of actions that we perform create our state of mind, and the state of mind that we create determines how we experience life. And so these very famous verses from the Dhammapada, the first two verses, which you could argue contain the whole of Buddhism in those first two verses, but what they say is experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. If you speak or act with an impure mind, with an unskillful mind, suffering will follow, like the wheel of the cart follows the ox. And then the second verse is experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. If you speak or act with a pure mind, then happiness will follow, like a shadow that never departs. So there's just two messages from those verses. One is that our experiences are produced, as I was saying, our experiences are produced by our mind, and that our mental states, our mind, are determined by our actions. So if we speak or act in a positive way, in a skillful way, then happiness will follow. If we speak or act in an unskillful way, then suffering will follow. And this is basically this is what brings meaning to life for Buddhists. We can take control. We can take control of our experience. We can take control of our actions, and we can create a very radically different experience for ourselves by creating a radically different state of mind. So the karma we create shapes the course of our life, and understanding that alongside the fact that we're going to die, it gives us a sense of, well, this is what I need. This is what we need to do with our life. This is what I need to do with my life, is to start to act more ethically and start to create a more happy experience, a more positive experience, to kind of, it's possible to become free from suffering by the karma I create. And specifically, in traditional Buddhism, when we talk about death, we talk about rebirth. There's traditional Buddhist teaching that we will be reborn into different realms. And there's the traditional Buddhist image here of the wheel of life, and it shows, people might not have come across this before, but it shows sometimes 5, sometimes 6 different realms that we can be reborn into. And you can take that literally. It can be taken as a literal teaching that we will be reborn again and again into different circumstances. And people at the time of the Buddha were obsessed with what happens after you die. That was really, really important for people at the time of the Buddha. In our kind of time, that's less important. That seems to be kind of, the whole idea of rebirth is less easy to digest in our society, perhaps. So this teaching can also be taken in terms of psychological states. Basically, depending on our psychological state, it's as though we can experience very, very different realms. It's as though we're living in a very different world. And there are some states, it's said, there are some realms in Buddhist tradition where it's very, very difficult to practice the Dharma. And so briefly I'll just describe some of those. So there's said to be a hell realm, and the hell realm is a state of intense pain and suffering, which is said to be brought about by actions of hatred and kind of states of mind of hatred. Previously, we find ourselves in a hell realm of just a very, very intense pain, where we are preoccupied by pain to the extent that it's not possible to practice the Dharma. It's very, very, very difficult. It'll be very, very difficult to practice the Dharma in that kind of state. There's a hungry ghost realm where we are obsessed, we're kind of preoccupied by addiction, and it's a state of intense, kind of described as intense thirst, craving and addiction. Again, where we're preoccupied to the extent where it's not easy, there's so much suffering, it's not possible to practice the Dharma. It's not really going to be a priority for us to practice the Dharma. And then there's the animal realm, which is dominated by ignorance, you could say. And it's where we're really just in a state where what's important to us is animal urges of sex, food, sleep. Again, in that kind of state, we're just not really aware of the possibility of a spiritual life. That's not an option for us. And then there is the Deva realm. So we could be experiencing constant pleasure, which might sound like something to aim for. It might sound like the idea of what the goal could be, but it's not actually. From the Buddhists, that's a dangerous place. If we are preoccupied with pleasure, distracted by pleasure, there's no motivation. We lose the kind of sense of urgency. There's no motivation to practice the Dharma. So we don't in that kind of state, the Deva state, the heavenly state, we don't practice the Dharma because we're just constantly distracted by pleasure. And it's said that will eventually run out, and then we'll experience severe suffering, severe pain. So it's said that of all the different realms, the most precious, the most valuable state to have, to acquire, is the human state. So, the human state is characterised by a kind of balance of pleasure and pain. In the human state, there's a balance of pleasure and pain. So there's enough pleasure that we're attracted to beauty, we're attracted to higher states, higher existence. The spiritual life becomes attractive because there's enough pleasure is available. But there's also enough pain in our existence to make us reflect on our existence, make us reflect on why we might want to change, why we might want to escape the wheel of life, the suffering. So there's a kind of balance. There's not so much pain that we're kind of overwhelmed by pain. There's not so much pleasure that we're kind of demotivated. So there's a healthy balance of pleasure and pain in the human state. But also, even more important, what typifies a human state and what makes it precious, what makes a human state precious from traditional Buddhism, is that we can become aware, we can become self-aware. It's called self-reflexive awareness. So there's the ability as human beings, what distinguishes us from, or some of us, from animals, and so is the ability that we can become aware of our minds and our actions. We can become aware of what we're doing, and that gives us a choice. And you could argue that the extent to which we are human is the extent to which we are aware of our mind and our emotions, our states, our actions, and the kind of consequences of our actions. So you could, the most valuable, precious thing about being a human being from a Buddhist perspective is that we've got the ability to be in a gap. What I'm essentially talking about for those who've done the beginner's course, which hopefully is all of us, is what Sangha actually calls the gap. So we simplify the wheel of life, the kind of outer segments of the wheel of life in this way. We say, well, basically our karma is habitual. We habitually create the same states of mind, we habitually create the same experience. And the beauty, the fantastic thing is that as human beings, we can become aware of this, we can step back and have a perspective on what's happening. And that creates a gap. It creates a gap in our experience. So rather than just having our buttons pressed and doing the same old thing in the same old situation, we can step back and have a choice. We can choose what to do. We can have a creative response. So through the law of karma, we can create a very, very different state of mind and a very, very different experience of the world, a radically different. And we heard from the ultimate goal as for Buddhists, we heard about last week, the experience of the Buddha's enlightenment, the possibility just to become fully awake, to fully become free from suffering, free from greed, free from hatred, and to develop unlimited states of compassion, of love, of wisdom. So that's basically the vision of what's possible for a human being. So we could do a bungee jump, we could do a skydive, we could save up and buy a ticket to go into space, which I did see a friend of mine on Facebook say that's what his ambition was to do with his life. And we could do all of those things. There's nothing wrong with doing those things. But from a Buddhist perspective, what life is about is working with the law of karma, becoming aware of our actions and creating a radically different experience of ourself and of the world. That's what's possible from a Buddhist perspective. That's what life is really about. So that's why the human state is said to be very, very precious, because we've got enough pleasure and enough pain to want to escape the wheel of life. And we've also got self-reflexive awareness. We've got the ability to become aware of what's happening and make choices, which people in other realms don't have, beings in other realms don't have. And there's another, these realms form part of a list, another list, a list, again from Tibetan Buddhism, that describes why human life is precious. And you might not be able to see, so I will read them out. But it said that human life, a particular form of human life, is precious when we've got the leisure and freedom to practice the Dharma. And there's particular kind of conditions that described which make it very, very difficult to practice the Dharma. And I just wanted to talk about these because it's very easy to take for granted the opportunity that we've got, the conditions that we've got. It's very, very easy for me, and I imagine for others, to take those for granted. So, reflecting on those, becoming aware of them, we can realise actually what we've got is a very, very special opportunity. So the first four I've covered. The first four in this list are to be free from birth or existence in the hell realm, hungry ghost realm, animal realm or deva realm. So if we're free from those things, we can be in the human realm and we can practice the Dharma. But also, there are other things that are important and necessary that we can take for granted. One is, it's described in Tibetan terms as a barbarian land, which, I imagine made a lot of sense that, in 8th, 9th century kind of medieval Tibet, they would have, be surrounded by barbarian lands which were very dangerous. But how could we translate that into our terms? And basically what it's talking about is having a society and a culture where we are free to practice the Dharma, which actually is very rare, even in our lifetime. And in lots of parts of the world, religious freedom isn't possible. There isn't religious freedom in different countries and continents. You can't, in some places you couldn't be a Buddhist. And currently in the UK, we are free to be a Buddhist in Sheffield. We can practice Buddhism without fear of torture or imprisonment. But actually that could change. Who knows? That could change. We don't know. We don't know how long that will last for. So in a sense, we've got an opportunity to practice. We're free to practice Buddhism in our conditions. That's something I take for granted. Well, of course I can practice Buddhism, but it's not the case for other people, for all people. It's not always going to be the case in the UK. And then we've got kind of education. We've been educated. We've got culture. We've got kind of a society which values spiritual life. So these are kind of the things that the part of this particular condition, which we can take for granted. And I think the one which is possibly, because it's worth saying these are kind of 8 different conditions, and they all need to be in place to practice the Dharma. So hopefully we've got all of them. And maybe we've got some of them, but not one of them, and that might make it difficult to practice the Dharma. But what I think is most maybe relevant to our society is wrong views, because there's a lot of assumptions about what life's about, and a lot of views about what's important in our life that we just take on without realising, actually. So each of us will be conditioned by what society thinks is valuable, what society thinks is important. And it's very important, it is very important to question, well, what are the messages, what are the views of our society, what does society say is important, and are there any assumptions that I've made without realising it? So I could listen, but I invite you just to reflect on that, kind of what are the wrong views in our society? What are the messages, what does society say is valuable, is important, which might actually make it more difficult to practice the Dharma. I'll say a few. So the assumption, I must have a full-time job, I must work really hard and have a full-time job, because if not, I'm letting society down, I'm letting my parents down. Well, actually, that's an assumption, it's not the case. If you don't want to, you don't have to have a full-time job, and you can have more spare time to practice the Dharma. Having said that, obviously the conditions are changing, and economic situation means, well, actually, for a lot of people, we do, it's life, we need more money, but we need to have enough money to live on. But it's an assumption to question. The romantic ideal is another assumption to question. Do we need to get married? Society really values that we should be married. We don't have to be married. You don't have to be married. We don't have to have a partner. We don't have to have a family. But they're all kind of assumptions that are built into our society. So for me, this is the kind of the most dangerous one in our particular situation is wrong views, because all the other ones we can pretty much, or can often take for granted. The 7th one needs a bit of unpacking. It says in traditional Tibetan description is a senseless fool. We're not a senseless fool, and that needs some explaining, some unpacking. But it's I've described it as disability, kind of freedom from kind of any physical or mental impairments that might make it difficult for us to practice. So to some extent, this is less relevant in our society because there's so many resources available that if people are kind of impaired in any particular senses, that it's possible still to practice the Dharma for a lot of people. But at the time in medieval Tibet, it wasn't. If you didn't have kind of full faculties, you couldn't practice the Dharma. But to an extent, it might be less relevant. And then being born in a time or a place where there isn't the Buddha and there isn't the Dharma. And again, I just take this for granted. Well, of course there's the Buddha, of course there's Buddhism, of course there's the Dharma, but there hasn't always been. It's only in the last 2,500 years in our age that there has been the Dharma and there has been the Buddha. And at some point, it will die out. At some point, Buddhism will die out, the Dharma will die out, and people will be born, and the Dharma won't be available. So they'll have all of these situations, but the Dharma won't be available to practice. And again, it's just really worth reflecting how fortunate, how lucky we are to have the Dharma available. that we're not, we've been born in a time where there is the Dharma, there is a Buddhist Centre. There's another traditional list that I'm not going to expand on. I just want to mention a few things that it says. It just expands a bit more on this last bit. And it says that we're very, very lucky to be born, well, personally to respond to the Dharma. And this, I think, is worth reflecting on as well. If you think how many people come on a beginner's course, we started a beginner's course a few weeks ago. There's 85 people came on the beginner's course on week 1. And there's 500,000 people in Sheffield. So out of all the people in Sheffield, there was 85 people. Only 85 people were there hearing about the Dharma. And those 500,000 people are doing something else with their life at the moment. They don't know about they either don't know about the Dharma or they don't care about the Dharma. So for some reason, the Buddhist tradition says it's karma. We have responded to the Dharma. We saw the advert. We typed in on Google Buddhism and meditation, or introduction to Buddhism or something like that, and we found out about a 6-week course, and we decided to come, and then we heard about the gap, and we heard about the other teachings and Buddhist ethics, and something resonated in us, something within us resonated with the teaching. And it's worth reflecting, well, you're very lucky that happened, and why did that happen? Why was it that you responded to the Dharma when other people haven't done? So there's 85 people came to the first week of the beginner's course. By the end of it, there's usually maybe 15 or 20 people left, and maybe less people might come to study Buddhism on Sangha Night. So it's worth reflecting kind of what in it, how fortunate we are to have the Dharma. What would our life be like without the Dharma? How lucky, how fortunate we are that the Dharma exists and that we responded to it. And then, finally, that the Dharma has survived, because the Dharma can exist in the world, but it can die out. So we're still in a time when it's survived, and people are practicing the Dharma. It's not just that we've got books about the Dharma. People are actually practicing it. It's alive. The spirit of the Dharma is alive. People are practicing it. And there is a Sangha that is practicing it, a live Sangha at this Buddhist Centre. And people will support us. We've got a Sangha that will support us. So, just thinking kind of personally, why did you respond to the Dharma? And just how lucky we are to have this Buddhist Centre. It's only been the last 12 years that there's been this Buddhist Centre. This Buddhist Centre wasn't here 12 years ago. It won't always be here. But right now, we've got an amazing Sangha. We've got really, really clear Dharma made available by Sangha Lakshita, the founder of this movement. And it's available for us. And so it's really, really worth reflecting on that. The fact that, well, these two things together. One is that you're going to die. We're all going to die. We don't know when. So our life is precarious. Our life is fragile. We don't know how long we're going to live for. And then we've got this amazing opportunity. We've got these amazing resources. We've got the leisure and the freedom. We've got society that allows us to practice the Dharma if we want to. We're not going to be persecuted for that. We've got really high quality Dharma to practice. We've got an amazing Buddhist Centre, an amazing Sangha. So we're just really, really fortunate. And I just want to end by giving my own kind of personal response, my own kind of personal take to this. As I said, I don't like to reflect on death. It's not something that I enjoy doing or kind of spend a lot of time doing. But over the years, I've been exposed repeatedly to the idea that I'm going to die. It's become more and more to the forefront of my consciousness. And there have been some responses, some benefits. That one is that I really value people more. There was one of the people I mentioned earlier who is sick is a friend of our family who had quite a serious accident, a serious fall, almost a year ago, and was paralysed. He's paraplegic. And what that really struck home to me was just how tenuous our conditions are, our life is. I just assume that I go to visit him in hospital, and he hasn't been out of hospital for the last 10 months. And I'm free to go out of it. I'd have to spend all my time in hospital. I'm free to eat food. He can't eat food. I'm free to kind of feel the breeze and to see the sun, to come to a Buddhist Centre. So all of that can change quite, just at the drop of a hat. It can just change at the drop of a hat. So I've become much more appreciative of my parents, actually. My kind of I know my parents aren't going to live forever, and also I've got my family. I've got a 9-month-old son, and I'm aware he's not going to live forever. It's his life is precarious and fragile. He could get ill, something could happen to him. So I'm very aware, and it makes I'd like to think I appreciate the people in my life much more than I did before. And yeah, my relationships with my friends and family are stronger and better than they were before. But in terms of my response to these conditions as well, and the preciousness of life, there's a lot of things that are out of my control really. I can't control really what kind of society we've got. I can vote for who I think is the right party at the next election, but apart from that, it depends on what everyone else votes for as well. I've got very little control over our society and what happens in there. To an extent, I haven't really got much control over whether I have a serious accident or not, or whether I die or not. These are all things that are out of my control. But the one thing that I recognise I do have control over is actually the availability of the Dharma. That's one thing I do have influence over, is the availability of the Dharma and the Sangha. And that's what, for me, I've decided is the thing that's most important to do with my life. That's the thing that is most important that I can do with my life, is to act to make those available for people, to make the Dharma available for people, to try and create a Sangha that will be available for people after I die. Because I was struck by this, I think it was Vedanya that said this, but I was struck by the statement that what we're doing is creating a Sangha for the future. We're not creating a Sangha that, in a sense, we do benefit from it now, but largely people in the future will benefit from what we're doing. That's the kind of vision that Vedanya has, and I'm trying to adopt as well, that actually what we're doing now, we're creating a Sangha that people will benefit from in the future. But I also do have a belief in rebirth. I'm somebody who does believe in rebirth. I find it kind of quite normal, quite natural thing to believe in, that I've been alive many times before. It certainly does feel like I've been doing some of the same old habits again and again for a lifetime. Some of them, it feels like I've been doing it for a long time. And yeah, I do have the sense, well, I'll be at it again, and I want to kind of create enough momentum in this life that I'll discover the Dharma and recognise it again in the next lifetime. And I like the idea. There is an idea that we sometimes encounter the same people again. Lifetime. I remember hearing Swami Matti talk about this in a talk a few years ago. The idea that sanghas find each other again. So I like the idea that some of us will have been practicing together in the past, and that we'll meet each other again in the future and practice again in the future. So it's something that does inspire me, that idea. But yeah, that's my own response to the imminence of death and the preciousness of our conditions. Is actually the thing I can have control over is the Dharma and the Sangha, and making that available for people. And what goes with that is a wholehearted practice as well. If we practice the Dharma wholeheartedly, then we change actually, and the Sangha changes, because the Sangha is made up of us. The Sangha is made up of individuals. So if the individuals in the Sangha practice wholeheartedly and they change, well, the Sangha will change. The Sangha will become more potent, and that's something to reflect on as well. Yeah. So yeah, basically just to summarise, we're going to die. What are you going to do about it?